What's up, Mafia Nation? Welcome back. It's LVT.
And Dirty D.
And we're here to do another reaction video for you. Let's get it.
So today we're doing the Battle of Verdun Sabaton history. Is that 10? Is that like number 10?
Yeah, it's like the 10th episode that they did.
The 10th episode?
Yeah, there's 97 of these episodes.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Wow.
But, so the story behind this history channel is they talk about all of the songs that they have written about. So you and I already reacted to the song Fields of Verdun.
Ah.
So we're going to watch the history behind the Fields of Verdun so we can learn the story.
It's going to be sweet.
The song.
But before that, make sure you go over and subscribe.
Smash that notification bell.
And like, comment, and share.
All right. Let's learn some history.
The Battle of Verdun was the longest battle of the First World War, lasting over 300 days. And yet, the attacking German army was unable to break through that symbol of French national pride.
And our song Fields of Verdun from our upcoming album, The Great War, is about that battle and the French slogan of courage, they shall not pass.
I'm Indy Neidells.
And I'm Joachim from Sabaton, and this is Sabaton History.
Now, he's going to tell you a little bit about the song and the album, but I'm going to give you a little Verdun history lesson.
In late 1915, German Army Chief of Staff Erich von Falkenhayn was looking up and down the map of the Western Front. It had been more than a year since the stalemate and trench warfare had begun there. This is during the First World War. The home front was already suffering under the naval blockade, and he feared a war of attrition that the German Empire could only lose. He needed to go on the offensive. To Falkenhayn, the weakest point of the Western Front was the British sector, and attacking at Artois could, he believed, lead to a decisive breakthrough that would collapse the whole Western Front. But he'd learned the hard way that without eliminating or at least tying down the French beforehand, the defense would be too strong. So, to deliver the blow in the north, he would attack at a place further south that would draw in as many French forces as possible. It must be a place the enemy could not afford to lose for strategic or propagandistic purposes, and would thus fight until wiped out. Such a place was Verdun. Verdun was not Falkenhayn's first choice, since it was a heavily fortified area. But it was also a commanding location. By capturing the heights east of the River Meuse and loading them with artillery, the Germans could constantly threaten the city and the local defenses, forcing the French to continuously attack the German defenses. The French would be tied down, and if they lost badly, the British would be forced to intervene. In the best case, they would hastily execute an offensive at the Somme, suffer heavy casualties as well, and open themselves up for a decisive German counterattack. Falkenhayn concluded that if Verdun was successful, there would be peace before the summer of 1916. The key to the attack was heavy artillery. Total destruction, then attack battalions and pioneers storming the hills in a wedge toward the mighty fortress of Douaumont, taking the remnants of the other fortresses that were surely destroyed by the heavy bombardment. Preparations were made over the winter, massing artillery pieces of all calibers and millions of shells.
How huge
The attack
that
was
ship
planned for February once the weather cleared. On the 21st of February, the bad weather finally cleared, and German aircraft and observation balloons hit the skies. At 7:12 a.m. came the order to attack. The largest concentration of guns in history to this point opened up in a violent concert, described by witnesses as the Symphony of the Devil. Even in the Vosges near the Swiss border could be heard the thunder of the German guns. In an intensity never seen before, the barrage destroyed whole forests, blowing trees meters high into the air and raining stones and earth on the poor souls on the...
Could you imagine just, you're just doing your job in the army and then a tree goes flying in the air?
Yeah.
With a big ass explosion? Like, that's terrifying.
No, what they're saying is that there was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of explosions all simultaneous happening at once. Like,
yeah.
It was a concentration of guns.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And trees.
So imagine, like, just bombs raining from the sky. Your body parts are flying everywhere.
Correct. Blood, gore, bodies, trees.
your man's just got
Stones.
blown up.
Trees meters high into the air and raining stones and
bitchin'.
earth on the poor souls on the ground. Some soldiers were simply obliterated, torn
legs,
apart by the force of the guns.
Stop it.
Others were buried alive deep in their trenches or bunkers. Then the German combat troops emerged from the saps with grenades, wire cutters, and flamethrowers. With the advantage of surprise, they stormed the first French lines. Through ice, rain, and snow, the soldiers fought as rifle shots and grenades burst in their midst. Trench after trench, the Germans gained a foothold, despite fierce resistance from well-camouflaged French machine guns and blockhouses. Thing is, for French Army Chief of Staff Joseph Joffre, Verdun wasn't that important, at least militarily. If the Germans could not be held on the east bank of the Meuse, the French would retreat and build new positions on the western bank. This was what Falkenhayn feared. But Aristide Briand made it perfectly clear that losing Verdun was not acceptable. Not only would the psychological effect be disastrous for the French public, it would undermine trust in the current government. And if Briand lost his job, so would Joffre. So giving up Verdun was out of the question. This is exactly what Falkenhayn had hoped for. However, though the Germans advanced the first weeks, it was not nearly as far as Falkenhayn had calculated, and the French had brought in reserves and Philippe Pétain to lead the men. The most important heights were still far away and under French control, and taking the fortress of Douaumont was the key to those heights. Unlike the big fortresses in Belgium that had quickly fallen to modern heavy artillery at the beginning of the war, the French had used a stronger special concrete for Douaumont that just would not break. And the fortress soon seemed like an island in an ocean of fire and shrapnel. Small platoons of German soldiers that crept towards the fortress in early March found that it was actually mostly empty. And the strongest fortress of Europe was thus taken by a German officer with a pistol and a lot of guts. Fort Douaumont is for many the symbol of the Battle of Verdun. The Germans celebrated its fall, but Douaumont was a trap for the men inside. Every direct artillery hit put out the lights, and the men cowered in darkness for days, living in their own waste, sharing their food with rats and lice, while the stench of the dead and the screams of the wounded haunted the long corridors. But you know,
Sounds
this
like
was
great
actually
living
still better
conditions.
than soldiers outside the fortress walls had to endure in the meat grinder that was Verdun. The French just had one supply road out of range of German artillery. Only trucks for military purposes were allowed to use that road, and soon over 3,000 trucks a day were bringing men, ammunition, and supplies up the road. If one broke down, it was simply pushed off the road, which became known as the Voie Sacrée, the Holy Road. The German offensive began to drastically lose speed. The whole area of Verdun had become a maze of trenches and shell holes where death was always near. I mean that literally. This is only an area of 30 square kilometers, and the death toll grew to the hundreds of thousands. The name Verdun became synonymous with the mechanized death of the First World War. But it really bound the French together. Pétain had ordered a new rotation system where no soldier was supposed to stay longer than 10 days in the front lines before being rotated out. This meant most soldiers in the French army had gone through Verdun. By April, the lack of progress was turning the whole idea of the Battle of Verdun into a farce. The more reserves Falkenhayn committed to the operation, the fewer he had ready for the real attack against the British. So Falkenhayn had to choose: stop the offensive and defend the gains that were made, or keep going with the offensive but with all available forces. Half measures were now unacceptable. He would keep up the offensive. As June arrives, Falkenhayn officially declares bleeding dry as the main aim of the offensive. But bad news now also arrives. Russian General Alexei Brusilov launches his offensive on the Eastern Front. It is a spectacular success, and Germany's ally Austria-Hungary might be knocked out of the war. German reinforcements bound for Verdun must instead head east immediately. And more bad news, the French now have air superiority in the west thanks to the new Nieuport 11 planes and air-to-air Lancier rockets. Time seems to be running out for a German victory at Verdun. Falkenhayn launches what he hopes is the final attack towards Fort Vaux and the heights around the village of Fleury. On the 7th of June, Fort Vaux falls. A victory for the Germans for sure. But is this the turning point at Verdun? Not quite, for Fort Souville still stands in the way of victory, and this the Germans cannot take. June marks the limit of their advance at Verdun. On June 23rd, French General Robert Nivelle gives his famous order, "Vous ne les laisserez pas passer, mes camarades," which was later shortened to, "Ils ne passeront pas." They will not pass, and indeed, they do not.
By the way, the last video that we did, and I made a Lord of the Rings reference, and you made fun of me. People in the comments agreed with me, and they all said, Gandalf! So ha.
But he just said that it's not
They
from
will
that.
not pass, and indeed, they do not.
Shh, Gandalf.
The French hold out in June, and on July
that
the
happened
1st,
there
the
too, I
British
knew
relief
that.
attack begins at the Somme.
But he literally just
the
explained
pressure
that it's
there
not from that.
forces
Gandalf.
German reserves away from Verdun to the north. With the
You're right.
Russians still advancing in the east, there are no options for Falkenhayn available. He must dig in at Verdun as the three largest battles in history to this point all rage simultaneously. But by August, Pétain has a 7-to-1 advantage in artillery, and the German positions are pounded day and night. And as if things aren't bad enough, Romania joins the Allies. A new front and hundreds of thousands of new enemies emerge overnight for the Germans. Falkenhayn has lost the confidence of his Kaiser and then loses his job. Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff take over running the German army. That, of course, does not mean that the battle is simply over, but it is France's turn to attack. Pétain brings in two 40-centimeter caliber railway guns to fire 900-kilo shells. That's around a
Holy
ton each
shit.
Yeah,
on
that's
Fort
huge.
Douaumont, which finally cracks. 8 months after its fall, the French retake the fort in early November, and their counterattack is relentless. What the Germans captured over months of fighting, the French now retake in mere hours. By the end of 1916, the front lines are nearly
All that
back
work
where
for
they were in
nothing.
February. For a few kilometers of land, hundreds of thousands of men have died. The Battle of Verdun lasted 303 days and nights. Estimates of the total casualties run as high as 1 million men, though it was likely closer to 700,000. But still, it was the longest battle of the First World War. And for many of the war's soldiers, it was the epitome of brutal, mechanized modern war. Many veterans would later remember Verdun by its smell, the mixture of gas, bodies that lay for months unburied, and the mass graves that were churned up by artillery fire. Corpses that laid for months in the dead zones of no man's land were mummified, the faces frozen in their final expression before death.
Brutal.
The soldiers advancing into the forward trenches often had to stomp over the corpses and body parts of their dead comrades. Only the flies and rats thrived at Verdun in 1916.
Jeez, man.
Before Joachim talks about the song, I would like to spoil the moment with a side note. It has been accepted history for a century that Falkenhayn's intention was to bleed France dry at Verdun, but this may not be the case. Falkenhayn claimed that this was his plan from the get-go, and he wrote about it in his 1915 Christmas memorandum to the Kaiser. However, the Kaiser never mentions such a memorandum, and there's no actual evidence that it ever existed. Falkenhayn may well have made all of this up as an excuse after the fact to explain away his failure. I did a whole episode about the Falkenhayn controversy on the Great War channel. The link is in the description. And now, back to Sabaton.
All right. That was extremely intense, brutal, vile, and painted it in an extreme picture.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And now they're going to connect the lyrics of the song to that whole backstory.
Okay, so that video is gonna make a lot more sense. Now we're
Yes.
gonna go back and rewatch the video
Yeah.
later.
Mm-hmm.
Now that it all
Is in
makes
the
sense.
description.
We're gonna be like,
And
oh,
now,
okay.
back to Sabaton.
Okay, so new album, bunch of new songs. Now, how was it writing Fields of Verdun specifically?
Oh, to be honest, that was one of the harder ones.
Yeah?
We didn't know where to start, from which angle to cover it. I mean, we were stuck in a mountain of information. But then we just thought, well, let's just start and see where all this info that we have now read takes us. And that actually started to work out, you know.
Now, this album, The Great War, all of the songs have to do with the First World War.
Yes, yes.
But is it a concept album like Tommy, where you have to follow a story? Or?
Oh, yes and no. Let's say it's got a red thread you got to follow or something.
Okay.
All events covered on the album
Yeah.
happened during the Great War.
Yeah.
But they're not chronological order.
Okay, so it's a Great War theme without being the Great War concept.
Yeah.
Like if Julio Iglesias, and he does an album, and you know all the songs are about love, so he's got a theme.
Exactly.
He's got a theme on his album.
Well, that's a good name for it, a themed album, because it's not a true concept where we follow it from the beginning to the end.
Because of this particular part of that themed album, you're going to be doing a few things in Verdun this spring and summer, yeah?
Yes, but you weren't supposed to say that because that's a secret. You never heard that shit.
You never heard that. We couldn't cut it out if you really want.
No, never.
Okay,
You
never.
didn't hear
Okay.
that shit. Shut your
Yes,
mouth.
this is wow, we're going live.
Yeah.
Hi, Mom. For now, here is a few seconds of some of this unreleased music from the song Fields of Verdun from the album The Great War.
Fields of execution, turn to wasteland from
That's the video.
grass.
That is it.
Thou shalt go no further, it was said they shall not pass.
So
And
dope.
that's it for today.
But we'll see you next time and every time on Sabaton History.
Brutal. Yeah.
So cool.
All right, everyone, that's it for today. Remember to subscribe to Sabaton History, but also the regular Sabaton channel. Also, check out World War II and Time Ghost. If you want to see more videos like this, here's a playlist. Cool stuff. You want to see it. And also,
Wrong
there's a
side.
chance for you to get a special edition of our upcoming album,
Oh,
The
wait, there
Great
it
War.
is.
Yeah.
If you go and join us on Patreon. So do that, and do that now. Bye-bye.
So cool.
Okay, so that was sweet.
Yeah, that was super cool.
I like the History Channel.
Yeah, I told you you would.
World history is one of my favorite classes.
And now you know the story behind the Fields of Verdun,
Yeah.
which was really cool. It was fun to learn about. So if you guys would be interested in seeing us do more of these, we would be super interested in checking it out. So be sure to leave us suggestions in the comments or in our Discord. Or if you want to see your reaction done first, you can send us a donation and you will get bumped to the very top of the list.
We had a merch line also in the description below.
We also have all of our social media.
Yeah, scrolling. I gotta look at the other screen to see it though.
Scroll, 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 scroll.
Until next time, I'm Dirty D.
And I'm LVT.